Pre-gap bundle. Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and welcome to the library. I'd say a while back, and this would have been a serious while back, like one of the really early videos we did on the channel. I did a video that had a thumbnail that looks like this. And I was really excited in that one because what I was able to do was walk through the 2019 Marvel relaunch of the Conan the Barbarian, title, which was really cool, and I was quite happy about that. But when I presented that video, a couple things. First of all, I had no facial hair, which looks really weird to look back at it now and like, ew, gee, I am so lucky my wife is still with me. I think that pretty much on a daily basis. But, what I really miffed though, was I wasn't actually walking through the entire 2019 series. What I was actually walking through is just issues 1 through 12 of the 2019 series. What I completely did not discuss was issues 13 through 25 of the same series. Today, we're going to correct that mistake. Today, we're going to look at 2 trade paperbacks. We're going to look at this one, which is the first of the 2 that covers the last half of that series, which I know is a weird way to explain it, but I get there eventually. And then we're also going to look at this one. Now, within these 2 trade paperbacks, there are 3 stories, or 3 story arcs, as I've broadly clumped them together. So what we're going to do here is 2 things. One, we're going to turn the camera around and sit down at the desk, because I've spent an entire day gardening, and I'm exhausted, because I'm old, and I want to sit down. So we're going to do that. Then what we're going to do is walk through these 3 story arcs in broad brushstrokes. I'm going to share some images with you. I'm going to share some similarities, interesting things that I've noticed. And then we'll come back at the end of this one and do a wrap-up and say, well, should you go pick these 2 trade paperback ups? Maybe you want to get the comics, or maybe you don't want to get these at all. Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. I'll tell you what my conclusion is, though. Without any further ado, let's get the camera around, sit down, and let's get into the books. Alright, let's get into the first of these 3 story arcs, and quite frankly, let's sit down. Yes, sitting down is important. Here. That's 1000% better. Okay, so, as I mentioned on the intro, what we're going to do here is I'm going to walk through these 3 story arcs, and I'm going to go through some things that I noticed that were similar to other stories I've read, and also just some general comments as we go. But what I'm not going to do is go through these page by page. And in fact, I'm keeping myself off-center on the screen here, so I can keep this space where the map is right now, up here to share images with you as we go, because quite frankly just looking at me talking, it's got to be somewhat dull and really not that attractive. Okay, story number 1. Story 1 is called The Crucible. Now, The Crucible was a very interesting story. It's very much a dungeon crawl story. Now, for those of you who don't D&D and who don't know this, a dungeon crawl is effectively where you take an adventuring party and you send them into a dungeon to meander their way through it. Now, sometimes these sessions can be very quick, where you go in, you get something, you get out. Other times, the entire adventure can just be a dungeon crawl. And sometimes it's called a crawl because it feels like you're crawling along through these things. And you're trying to discover everything as you go. So, Jim Zub, who wrote this story, is quite vocal about D&D. You can go and you can see a variety of the things he's written either in his newsletter or in any of his interviews that he's done, where he comments on D&D and the role it has played in his life. And in this story, that's particularly evident. And the reason why I say that is because the structure of the story is very much a dungeon crawl, a traditional Dungeons and Dragons dungeon crawl. But you have Conan mixed into it in his typical Conan fashion. And this is also a setting off point that leads into story number 2 and story number 3. And I'll talk about those a little later. So the story starts off with Conan doing exactly what Conan normally does. He's on a drunken brawl in, Uttaracaru? Hold on, did I get that correctly? Uttaracaru. Yes, see, this is why the map is here. So I looked at it. So he's there in a drunken, stupor, for lack of a better word, but he's having a good time going through the bars, but he doesn't understand a word everyone is saying. He just understands the universal language of money, alcohol, and, of course, women. Well, while he's there, he's challenged to a contest of strength, or what he assumes is a contest of strength. And what's very interesting about this is, throughout the entire story, and throughout the story that's happening up until this point in time, all of the background characters are speaking. But what's interesting is when you look at the language they're speaking, obviously Conan doesn't understand it, and they've done this purposely to convey the point that Conan has no clue what they're saying. But you start to see commonalities in the language that they're using in their word bubbles. Well, there's a reason for that. And we'll get to this, and I'll come back to this later. So Conan is subjected to this contest of strength, which then turns into a drunken brawl with two other individuals, where they name him the People's Champion. And he's all excited. He's thinking, great, I'm the People's Champion. This is awesome. I love being the People's Champion. Well, no, it's actually a very bad thing. Because this particular area has this crazy death cult. And what they do is they take their People's Champions and they throw them in this thing. Here, I'll put the image up over here. Of basically a skull's head where they get tossed down into the pit to survive what's essentially a dungeon crawl obstacle course with a variety of other individuals that have been sent down there. Now, the individuals that have also been sent down there include criminals, include people who are just passing through, other people who have been deemed to be the champion, who are local, who know the lore. And effectively, the idea is get through to the end, because really what you're doing here is setting yourself up as not just the people's champion, but you're also going to get the favor of their god. At the end of the day, the city will be rewarded. The more you survive, the better you do, the more the reward the city gets. And I could go through this thing line by line and do a variety of things that happen in this one, but I don't think I really want to, because the dungeon crawl is the story. The dungeon crawl is the strength of what you're reading here. And it was very, very well done. It's quite interesting as you go through. If you are a traditional Dungeons & Dragons guy, or girl, who knows? As you're going through this, you're reading like, oh, that's, ooh, don't touch that, because you know, don't touch that. No, that's just a little too convenient. You've learned to recognize the Dungeon Master's traps. So, yeah, there are Dungeon Master's traps in here. Unfortunately, the party that Conan goes through with, well, they don't make it. They really, and it's funny, you know Conan makes it. I don't think I'm spoiling anything with that one because, well, otherwise, how do you have the continuing issues? But they don't make it. In the process of going through, Conan does make connections with certain individuals. He actually ends up finding, well, would you call it a romantic attachment? I guess you could, because this really does lead into the jumping point that goes on later. And at the end of the day, he comes out and he does battle to become the people's champion. Unfortunately, for our little hot-headed Conan, he decides once he's the people's champion, he's going to climb up on the dais, or the dais, where they have a statue of their god, and defile it and destroy it. That doesn't go well. And in fact, he gets beaten and imprisoned, and they're going to sentence him to death. Now, this is where something really interesting happens, and this is where you go beyond the dungeon crawl story, and this is where you sort of get the nice little wrap-up at the end. Conan is trapped. He's starving to death. He's in a dungeon. He's shackled up. And while he's shackled up, one of the individuals that he ran into in the dungeon that he actually was rather fond of and had a connection with comes back as a spirit. And this is actually very similar to, in my mind, this particular aspect was very similar to, and it was reminiscent of the Shadow Kingdom, which is a Robert E. Howard story that's actually a Kull story, but where Kull and Brule are wandering through the dungeons, or the catacombs underneath the castle, and they see the spirit of a ghost come by. In that case, it's just the spirit going by. In this place, the spirit arrives and actually undoes the shackles that are binding Conan and helps him escape. It's quite funny because it's more the tone than anything else that actually made this reminiscent of that for me. Because it's really very much in the art and in the writing where you're like, ooh, that's somber. Ooh, that is horrifying though, because you got to remember, Conan's not really all that good with things that are spiritual or mystical or superstitious. So that was kind of a really cool thing. In the escape, Conan does make his way up to the Grand Magistrate, his chamber, and well, it's interesting because this individual turns around and says, well, I don't have any kids, but there is no God. This was all just there to, keep the people at bay and make them happy. So why don't you take over? By the way, here's my sword collection. And this is where things get interesting, you see, because the romantic entanglement that Conan met in the dungeon, her sole job was to come to this kingdom and get that sword, which was stolen from her lord's family, to bring it back. And we'll talk about where to in a moment. But it's quite interesting that as it's there on the wall, Conan decides that that's the one I'm going to grab. Grabs it, beheads the leader, burns the castle to the ground, and gets the heck out of town. Quite interesting that you've taken this dungeon crawl, but you've added this sort of Howard-esque mythos to the end of it, for me at least, where you had that throwback to what it seemed like was the Shadow Kingdom type event. But at the same time, you had Conan doing exactly what Conan always does. Drunken ball, great mirth, great misery. Like, the guy could be somber, and he was not happy, when unfortunately this lady love died. He had some thoughts about that, and he came back and wreaked his revenge for that very thing. quite a cool story and really an interesting and well done dungeon crawl. Coffee's a good thing. Oh yeah, coffee. All right, story arc number 2. Story arc number 2 is actually a really interesting one. And okay, before I even get into this part, I'm gonna say this right now. This story arc builds off of something that we've already covered on this channel, but it does it in a very good way. A long time ago, we shot a video, and the thumbnail to that video looks like this. And that was Conan and the Scarlet Sword. And in that, Conan, well, quite frankly picks up a Scarlet Sword. Now, the Scarlet Sword in that particular story is cursed. It takes over Conan. It turns him into a killing machine. The reason why is because the sword has its own agenda, and, well, it wants to kill everything. In a roundabout way. That story was kind of, well, it's funny because that was a Roy Thomas story, but that story, in the way it was presented, really just didn't hit home the way it should have. I believe this story arc number 2, is actually Marvel's attempt to correct that. Now, and here's why I'm going to bear with me here, okay? So the story here happens in such a way that, let me show you a panel. This is the panel that's near the end of story arc number 1. And this is when Conan first picks up the sword off the wall. Now, this is the sword that Naru Lee, his romantic interest in story arc number 1, has come all the way from Katai to retrieve. Now, why she would want to retrieve this, I don't know. You'll notice when Conan picks it up, and once he has it in his hand, it changes color. That's not sword colored anymore. That's bad. In fact, this sword isn't just a little cursed, it's a whole lot of cursed. Very similar to the Scarlet Sword. Now, what happens here is, well, the sword starts to take over and put visions in Conan's mind. While he's trying to escape this area, it's putting visions of, well, for example, at one point in time, he wanders his way into a village. And it's unclear as to whether the two individuals that he's talking to at that point in time really were being aggressive, or whether the sword convinced him they were being aggressive. But this is the first time Conan starts to recognize, no, I saw a vision of this village full of demons, and that lady was holding a demon baby, but now I see normal people. Something's not right here, and I better leave. And he leaves. But this is the tipping point where the sword is starting to take over. Now, in the Scarlet Sword, things were a little different, because once Conan had that sword, he was taken over. It was not a tempting thing as you go. This sword is a little more subtle. And I actually really like what Jim did on this one, because he's made the sword into more of a conniving and evil entity. Similar to the Scarlet Sword, where you had an ancient sword that was lost and then found underground. In fact, there's even very similar panels. Here's a panel from the Scarlet Sword where they find the sword that's buried underground, right? And actually one of the laborers falls onto it, and that's the first time the sword tastes blood again as it's reawoken. And here's the panel that we see that's actually in the 2019 series, where the sword is recovered, because the sword is telling Conan its own origin, saying, I was created in the ancient past by these demons, and I was always looking for a vessel that was worthy. Time passed and I was lost, but then I was recovered. But at the end of the day, I couldn't find a human strong enough to be my vessel. You're going to be my vessel, this is what we're going to do. And this sword, at this point in time, is very manipulative. Conan has seen these horrific visions of him fighting his way past a wall made of skulls and bones and demons, and he doesn't really know what's going on and what's reality and what isn't. But he does know he doesn't like the word vessel. The entire story arc comes to an end when Conan does something that Jim actually rewrote and used again in the Titan series, when he actually breaks out of the actual spell, the thing that's trying to, well, what can I say here, use him as a vessel. And this happens in the Braithwaite Zub work that was done in the Titan one. And I'll put an image up over here on that one where Conan actually, with the help of Beylit or not, breaks out of that control. And here's the actual image that we see in this 2019 series where Conan breaks the spell here and becomes independent. And at this point in time, he's not happy with the sword. He knows it's bad, and he's out. And that's really where this story ends. It really is a tale of where you're taking the Scarlet Sword mythos and what happens in it, which is a very common theme. I can't say, we've just taken this and we've copied it, because I don't think that's what's happened here at all. What I think has happened is you're taking a theme that is used repeatedly of a cursed sword. Hell, look at the Black Knight with Marvel Comics. But you're turning it into a much larger and more in-depth thing with a very conniving sword. This was very cool, and this story arc effectively ends with Conan breaking that spell, but then immediately being captured, because guess where he's wandered to? Well, he didn't just think he went over a wall. He's actually in Katai. Okay, now you remember at the beginning when we talked about the first arc, and I'm going to stick this little snippet in right here, and I said, pay attention. These people are speaking, but they're speaking in a language that seems to be fairly common, and it carries throughout the entire arc. Well, there's a reason why that's actually the case. The end of book 1 actually gives you a cipher. That's right. When Jim wrote this, he actually created a language that you can translate and write back into the story if you want to get the full dialogue of what these locals are talking about. And then you're like, oh, it's funny, Conan didn't get that. But it's very neat. And what you'll notice in this one, and I tried this, and it's, again, I wouldn't say that everybody should do everything that I do, because that's probably a really bad idea. It'll cost you a lot of money. It's very painful most times. I took Google Translate to a lot of these things, and I said auto-translate. It was picking up pieces of Ukrainian, it was picking up pieces of Uzbek, it was picking up pieces of all sorts of things in these languages just through automatic translate. So clearly Jim was drawing in from a variety of sources here. Quite interesting and a very neat trick, and also really rewarding for you as the reader. So if you do get the trade paperback, it's in there. I don't know if it's in the comics, but I can tell you it's at the end of book 1 in the trade paperback. Okay, let's get into story arc number 3. Now, story arc number 3 takes up the entirety of book 2, this one over here. It takes the whole thing, because it's not just a little one. It's a big one, but it builds off of, well, effectively, the sword that was the focal point of story arc number 2, as well as the very thing that came out of, and which was Conan's takeaway for story arc number 1. And it takes Conan into Katai. Now, at the end of story arc number 2, you'll remember I said that he didn't just think he went over a wall and fought his way over there. He actually did fight his way over a wall, ended up in Katai. But what he finds are some very interesting little twists that happen here. And effectively, he gets drawn into the politics of Katai in a large adventuring theme. And the story I'll summarize for you here. He's basically captured because they say, well, you're a foreigner, and we don't allow foreigners beyond the border here unless they're part of an emissary. What? No. And we do have a revolution going on right now, so the odds are you're probably a spy working for them. So they capture him, and they're taking him back to the capital to find out what's going to happen to him. Along the way, Conan meets a scholar. And this scholar takes an interest in him, and everybody's kind of wondering, wait a minute, why do you speak our language? And he's like, well, it's complicated. It's a bit of a long story. And the actual takeaway here is he's learned the language as a byproduct of his possession by the very sword from story arc number 2, which is kind of a neat little twist. I like the way that Jim wrote that in there, and it carries forward. And it's also a wonderful thing that carries into the story and makes it a lot easier for Conan's adventure as he actually makes his way through Katai. At the end of the day, he is released, not basically voluntarily, by himself from being imprisoned, takes off with the scholar, winds up running into the rebels, finding out the rebels aren't exactly what people think they are, and in fact the leader of the rebels wants to feast on souls, and that's a bad thing. But that's okay though, because the scholar that he was befriending isn't quite a scholar. She's actually a magic-wielding spy type person, and helps separate the human vessel from the soul-stealing demon that is the rebel leader, just in time for Conan to behead that particular vessel. Which is cool. And it's kind of interesting that that happens because it draws back as a direct parallel to what happened with Conan with his sword. But in this case, this individual was not able to break the spell, and it took an external force. In Conan's case, he was able to break it. And which, again, still always is reminiscent to me in my mind for the last little while of, well, that's very similar to how Conan turned around and broke the spell from that Titan arc image over here. Very cool. And that was a pretty cataclysmic scene. And it leads into the Thurian story. Okay, I'm not going to go down that road. It's really, really cool. And I would encourage you, if you haven't read the Titan comics, go forth and read. You will enjoy them, okay? Yeah, you will. Anyway, after he helps them with the rebels, they decide he's going to be taken to the capital where he's going to be rewarded. And while he's there, the sword makes an appearance again. The emperor is assassinated, and there's a crazy lord that actually is possessed by this sword that wants to take over, and Conan does assist in defeating him with the emperor's help, and is rewarded with a pile of gold, and is told, okay, you can go off on your way. It's effectively Conan wandering into Katai, and basically an adventuring story where you're seeing a part of the Hyborian Age which you don't normally get to see a lot of, because not a lot of writers do write about it. But I will say this is very reminiscent of other things that we've read about Conan in Katai. And I'm going to point out two of them here. One is something that we covered when we did this video over here, which is our review of the King Conan Omnibus #1. Now, in that, Conan goes to Katai in issues number 5 through 8, if I remember correctly. 5 through 8? Which is interesting because in there he actually runs into Peleus and gets assistance from him. Now, Peleus, you'll remember from the Scarlet Citadel story of Robert E. Howard's, which is also interesting because Peleus is the individual that he runs into when he's going through a dungeon, which is similar to what we saw in story arc number 1, which is Conan running through a dungeon. But I think that's too far of a draw between those two. But you did see Conan go to Katai there, and he did get caught up in the intrigues that happened while he was there. Some of it being magic, but that was because, well, somebody stole Zenobia. Probably not a good idea. The one this is most similar to, though, is actually this series right here. Now, this is Conan and the Demons of Katai, which is another King Conan story. And we actually reviewed that in a video that's got a thumbnail that looks like this. If you want to check that out, I'll put all the links to all these things down in the description down there. You can click on them if you want. In that, Conan goes to Katai and ends up fighting a lord that has been possessed by, well, a demon sword. Pretty neat, but a little different. Well, actually a lot of different in the story and how it's actually enacted, but it's a similar theme that we see carrying through in here. Now again, I'm not saying somebody went and said, I'm going to take this story and make it better. These are very common themes that you see in adventuring, and I don't want anybody to try to draw those things out of this particular discussion. I'm simply pointing out that you did see something similar to that before. This was a really well done story, and I did enjoy the meandering through the nation of Katai. I really enjoyed the Emperor. I really did, and I don't know why. And I'm not going to spoil it for you guys. If you really want to see something really cool and something that surprises you at the end of the day, the Emperor is the guy. It's like, whoa, whoa, really quite good. And that finishes story arc number 3. All right, so as one little adjunct I'm going to stick at the end here, and I think it's important to put in here, and this is why we're going to do this. Otherwise, why would I be recording right now? Here's the deal. Okay, we've already covered stories number 1, 2, and 3, and these were the big ones. But if I said there's only 3, it's actually a bit of a misnomer, and I don't want to create an error like I did when I did the first one of these, where I said, oh, I'm covering the entire thing, and I only covered issues 1 through 12. There is actually a wrap-up story at the end of this. And I'm not going to go into great detail on this one because I don't want to spoil it. And what it does is it really wraps up the adventure of what happens to Conan when he's on his ship and he's leaving Katai to go back to basically his usual stomping grounds. Because he's heading back with a bucket load of wealth. And things obviously have to happen here, because this is young Conan's life, because, well, we don't remember him having a bucket load of wealth. And it wraps up rather succinctly, but it also feeds into Conan number 25. Now, Conan number 25 was a particularly important issue. And it was particularly important because it was legacy number 300. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to some people, but, you know, it does actually mean a lot when you're talking about Conan the Barbarian. It made it to legacy issue 300, and that's fairly material. And they were celebrating with legacy issue 300. They did a variety of different covers. One of my favorites is this one over here. And I really enjoy this. It's a Dan Panosian cover, which is just savage. I like it. It is good, okay? But in that, it's a wonderful wrap-up story that's kind of reflective. And in that, you have, it's Conan and Baylit, and they're running into a symbol that you saw, or Conan saw, on his voyage back. And in this, Conan and Baylit end up running into not only current Conan, but, because he's right there, future Conan and past Conan. And it's a wonderful reflective piece where Conan, at the end of it, comes back and says, well, yeah, those were fine, but I'm here right now. And it really gives you the message of live in the moment, which is quite an interesting thing, because that's really what Conan does. He doesn't think about 3 years from now. It's always now. What's happening now? A fun story. I'm not going to go into that one because it wasn't a massive arc. It was just a single issue feed-in, but another one that is included in book number 2 if you're interested. Other inclusions of book number 2 were, well, a bunch of covers, which is great because I showed you the cover that I like, but there are other ones that look like this as well, and others. So you can see what else happened with Conan number 25. But you also get inclusions, and I'm not going to go too far into them because, well, you can figure it out on your own. There are 2 other stories in here that are actually quite good, one of which is one of my all-time favorite Conan stories, and I'm actually going to be making a video shortly where I'm going to say, here's the top things you want to read if you want to get introduced to Conan, and this one story is in it. So I'm just going to leave that at that. Yeah. We got to stop. We can't make this too long. We're stopping here. We got to stop. Okay, it's wrap-up time. All right, it's wrap up time. Let's get back to the point where we answer that bajillion-dollar question. And we're going to do this sitting. Hold on, sitting. Oh, sitting is so nice. I am so old. Okay, and it also gives me a chance to sit in the world's squeakiest chair. I tell you, it's actually an old CN conductor's chair. And how I got, well, it's a long story. And this is where it's so dangerous to be an old man. Because old man rambling is always right there. The temptation is saying, oh, Tennessee fence. Why don't you just go meandering down? No, we're not going to do it. All right, back to the point. Should you buy these stories and should you buy these books or not? Well, I'm going to do this in 3 parts. Because I covered the stories in 3 parts. So that would make sense. Okay, story arc number 1 is a fantastic dungeon crawl. So if you're out there and you're a D&D guy or gal, and you're saying to yourself, I need to read Conan tearing through a dungeon. I need to read that Conan attitude, that live in the moment attitude, that I am a drunken buffoon, but boy, when I'm angry, and I'm going to burn your kingdom. If you want to read that story, it's right there. It's really well done, and I would encourage you to do so. Now, story arc number 2. Well, Demon Sword? Yeah. No, I'm going to caveat this right now, okay? I have already done a video where and in fact I referenced it in this video. It's this video. I have already referenced that where we did Conan and the Scarlet Sword, where it was Conan possessed by a sword. Breaks the spell. That's the story arc. That's it right there. And in that one, really surprising. It's a Roy Thomas story, and it just left a bad taste in my mouth. This did not. I am considering this to be the palate cleanser that Marvel is offering me for the effect of Conan, Demon Sword, breaking spell. This is now the one that I'm going to ring in my head with when I'm thinking of that particular story arc. If you've never read Conan and the Scarlet Sword, and you want to read Conan and a sword story, where it's a demonic sword, I would encourage you to choose this one over top of that one. So, there's my thoughts on that. Now, story arc number 3. Conan in Katai. Well, wow. There is so much happening in that. That is It's not just Conan going and then fighting a demon, the demon sword that has possessed a Katayan lord. No. It's Conan entrapped, still really bearing off the effects of being possessed, which isn't all that pleasant. Running, at least as far as I can tell, I've never actually been possessed. Running into a group of rebels, thinking he's going to work with them for a while, finding out they're really, really not that good, not really what you expect. And then all the intrigue, and then the Emperor. Oh my god. Okay. All right. If you like twisty-turny stories, and you like all sorts of little interesting things where you can go through it and you can jump down that Hyborian Age conspiracy theory rabbit hole like I do on a regular basis, you're really going to enjoy story arc number 3. I would encourage you to pick that up. Now, do you need to buy the trade paperbacks, or do you want to get floppy comic things? Well, I will warn you this. I will warn you this right now. Buying individual Conan comics and getting a full run of most things right now is a phenomenal pain in the, and I'm leaving that blank right there. It is, all right? I don't know why, and I don't know how this is happening, but for some reason, every time I go into a comic shop and I'm saying, okay, we're going to pick up a run, it's almost impossible. I don't know why. Stores are just not carrying them. The trade paperback formats, you can buy on Amazon. They're right there. You can get them shipped to your house. It's very convenient. And the other thing I'll say about the trade paperbacks is if you get them and you get number 2. Well, number 1 I know gives you that interesting language cipher at the end of it. I don't know if the comics give you that because I don't have the comics. But I will say this. Number 2 includes one of my all-time favorite single Conan stories just stuck in the back. I think that's fantastic. And you get it for free. And you get all the fancy covers that look like this. Or some of the other ones that, look like this. They're right there in there. You don't need to go buying all of these books. It's a much cheaper option. Now, is that something that all of you are going to want to do? Well, that's entirely up to you. I'm telling you, I thoroughly enjoyed these. And there's a reason why I took these from where they were in the reading pile and I jumped them up to the top. I'd just been waiting too long and I was too excited. And I said, no, I got to get into these things. There you go. Well, everybody, that's our video for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next video.